you want to start off just by introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi there. I'm Michael Papish. I'm the VP of Marketing and run marketing at Markforged, one of the world's largest industrial 3D printing platforms, and based here in the Boston area.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to get to chat with you because Markforged has had a really incredible year, I think, with the SPAC going public, with the Eiger Cloud software that was just released. So I think the timing is really great. But if we take a couple steps back, how did you first get started with Markforged?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been with Markforged for about 2 years now, and I was not part of this industry or really closely following kind of the world of 3D printing. Before Markforged, I was at Sonos, the wireless audio company, for about 5 years, running kind of their global product marketing, and had some friends who had left Sonos to come over to Markforged, and so it kind of been seeing what they were doing, and this opportunity came up. And what I loved about this one, I mean, the technology is magical, right? It's a box that instantiates physical objects. Like, okay, that blows your mind, and they can be made out of metal. Like, wow, that's super cool. But really, it's this pattern, which is the same pattern that I worked on at Sonos, which is hardware and software working together. It's not just about making the most badass hardware. It's not just an app that lives on your phone, that you use for social networking, which is like what a lot of startups do. It's the fusion of those two things together that I think makes this such a fun and interesting area to explore from a technology and product perspective. This idea that at the end of the day, we're not just building printers, we're building a platform. And at Markforged, we call our platform the Digital Forge. And the idea that this platform, all of the things that we make integrate into this platform. So there's one set of software that can live in the cloud that stores and centralizes all your parts and lets you print to any one of these printers anywhere in the world. And what I love about that is it's moving us towards a world where manufacturing isn't just about a giant factory, located in some place where there's cheap labor to make a bunch of, sort of the same widgets over and over again. It's a world where you can put the means of production distributed out where you need it, and then centrally sort of send parts and have them come off a printer wherever it is in the world. Completely changes the way you think about a supply chain, completely changes the way you think about what manufacturing is. So it's that ability to use the cloud, to use software, and to use really great hardware, but all together as a platform that at Sonos, we built a platform. We didn't just build individual speakers. We built a platform that worked across your home. Here at Markforged, we built a platform that works across the globe. That is so fun.
Definitely. I love so much about your answer. I am really excited to dig into distributed manufacturing, kind of what that might look like, because I think it's a really popular topic in the industry right now, but it's where the future of manufacturing is heading. Before Markforged, did you have any experience 3D printing?
Let's see. So in the companies I worked in, so in a company like Sonos, we had a really fun, lab, and that lab was full of, the CNC machines and printers and all kinds of cool stuff. So yes, I would often go hang out, watch things getting prototyped, maybe printed one or two things in my time there, like just for sort of fun, like homebrewy projects. And then obviously, was familiar with sort of the earlier way, the original kind of like consumer grade, MakerBot and things like that. Never got fully, like, I'm not a 3D printing head, sort of from the origins, but I love tinkering. I love opening things up. And so, 3D printers were common in the kind of maker spaces and other places that I were at. But really, at this, what Markforged does with industrial printing, very, and I had not, never used a Markforged printer before I got here.
Yeah. I think a lot of people in the hobby side are really, really into 3D printing and have 10 printers in their home, and there's never enough room to put another one. But I think if you look at the industry as a whole, a lot more people are interested in 3D printing. They might be tinkerers, but also they like the technology in the industry more than they like having a bunch of printers at their house actually doing things. So I think you're a very common case outside of the hyper nerds, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll say it's been fun. I mean, I have a Mark II like kind of over my shoulder here, and and I wouldn't, that's not something I would have had if I'm not working at this company. But it's so interesting to see what I do with it. So it's sometimes it's building useful things like I this is hard to see, but and we're on a podcast, so I will describe it.
Sure.
A small tool to clean the charge port of my Android cell phone. But that's a great example of a thing where it's like, okay, like I have a printer, I have a problem, I can totally print and solve that. I would never have thought of doing that. I would have bought it on Amazon, right? I would have gotten some $9 special cleaning tool. But here is like, okay, this is so easy. And then the other thing is I have a 2-year-old I was going to reach for. I have a collection of like, airplanes and trains and cars and that kind of stuff, and he loves he says, oh, that's the like the toy box, like he thinks toys.
That's where toys come from. No, I love that. I think nowadays my favorite things to print are like those little around the house things that like I identify, like I need a hook or I need a tool, something, and I can just like quickly draw one up, print it out, and then that problem is fixed. So it's cool to see that you have that same experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing we always say at Markforged is I think what we're trying to build is the world's most like powerful and flexible like multi-tool, right? Like it's you run into a problem, more often than not, you're going to find a solution that involves printing a part and putting it into action. And so like that pattern of, and I think it's also learning how to identify those problems, right? So it's like in the beginning, you might think, oh, I could, like for example, I have in my bedroom little headphone, sort of hook. And I think I would have immediately just gone and tried to buy something or figure, whereas to your point, it was so easy to say, okay, all it needs to do is, affix to the side of this thing, hold the thing up. That's totally doable. I can understand this. It's not even mechanically complicated. Let me print it. And so I think it's that like ability to identify the problem and then realize the solution is actually quite easy.
Yeah. So you touched on something that I want to see if we can expand a little bit. You said that sometimes the most challenging part is identifying that like, hey, a printer could be useful here. How do you see people kind of going about that learning process? I think when I talk to a lot of people in traditional manufacturing, a lot of times there's a lot of resistance to using 3D printing, or skepticism at a minimum. What steps can people take to try to get over that hump and kind of start seeing opportunities where they might not have before?
Yeah, I think there are two things that help here. The first is kind of like a foundational element, and then the second one is sort of a problem or application discovery process and getting better at that. The first one is, I think, for many people, many engineers who've been in this industry for a while, I still think there's a perception that 3D printing is not reliable, is not easy, doesn't do exactly what you want it to do, and can't make end use strong parts. So if you're biased, if you come into the problem space assuming all that stuff, you're not going to find a solution using the printer because you're going to basically cross off the list all the things you could potentially do that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So I think we've seen this. Like it's interesting from a marketing perspective, letting people know that, hey, the printer that we make at Markforged, it does what we say it's going to do. It's reliable. It's easy to use. It's not going to jam. It's easy to keep running. Like you're going to get a starter print. You can leave it overnight, come back to it in the morning. It's going to be done. It's going to look good. Yeah. Like just getting those reps down of recognizing this thing actually works is important for the engineer, I think, especially when they come in with that skepticism of like, does it work? Like, will it make what I need? So first you got to hit that bar. Then I think now you start to say, okay, it does what I want it to do. Now, how do I apply it? And I think that there's a combination of, identifying the right problems to solve, right? So a lot of times for us at Markforged, we're looking for problems that you might find in a factory on an assembly line, right? So what are those parts that, are super critical when they break, like the entire line goes down, nothing gets produced, it's not working, everything's stopped. But yet that part is maybe got elements of customization. It's hard to source. You can't keep a lot of inventory on it. these tend to be really great use cases for kind of killer printing applications. And so, an example of all that would be something like, the gripping fingers on a robot on the assembly line.
Okay.
Right. Modern assembly line has thousands of these things. Each set of fingers has to be custom shaped based on what are they picking up? What are they putting down? What do they have to do? And they wear out. So like if you kept inventory of every spare for every robot arm in your factory, like you're ran out of space in your factory. Like that's not a great solution. So awesome place to print. And so a lot of what we do at Markforged is actually literally like hang out with our customers, and we do something we call walk the line. We just walk up and down the assembly line and kind of each of us, the customer and us, pointing out places like, I bet you could print that thing. I bet you this thing would be, you could save a ton if you did this. And all of a sudden you build up these sort of categories of this type of application, this type of application. And now you have kind of a framework. So like we've seen a lot of customers, they'll start by buying a printer to solve one problem. They have one really annoying problem, come in our door, say, here's my part. Like, can you print this part? And as soon as you say, yeah, we can print that part, they're like, I'm buying a printer. But then they start using it, and they realize, oh, wait a second, like there's like 100 things around here that I could be fixing and working on. And now other engineers around them come hang out. Now they want more printers. So it's kind of one of those like scaling adoption curves where, you have to kind of solve some problems, and then you see some more problems, you solve more, and then it kind of snowballs and you solve lots of problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you kind of broke it down into two very simple categories. The first one is just like incorrect assumptions, myths of 3D printing that just engineers like have in their minds. And then the second one is, I'd say, more of the expansiveness of it, where I've seen over and over again where I would agree with your point where they buy it to solve one problem. Like they have one problem and that's it. And like, they're like, this tool fixes that problem. But then an engineer, maybe in a different department, needs a part and they don't want to wait 8 weeks. And then they're like, well, you have that printer. Can your printer help with this other thing that I'm working on? And then pretty soon the printer is just running 24/7, doing things for different engineers. So I almost think there's a really important part of discovery of having a tool in person in the shop compared to just buying parts online, that I think is really powerful for people to learn about it.
Completely agree, and that is very much one of our ideas is really just get the printers to the people. So if you have access to it, if it's sitting there, you're going to find ways of using it. And a lot of times, maybe that barrier of getting that first one in there, that's what we need to overcome. So like we do a lot of work with engineering programs in universities. How can we get younger engineers, using this technology, comfortable with it, understanding how it works. And then a lot of times when they show up at their first job, the first thing they ask is like, where's the Markforged printer? And so it's like, oh, well, we don't have one yet, but maybe we should get one. So it's like, it's that kind of thing where it becomes a standard part of how you do your job. And you come to rely on it and love it. And so that I think is super important. And also means at the end of the day, like from a company perspective, we don't feel like we compete against other 3D printing companies. We feel like we compete against people who are just doing the status quo. It's just like, it's not even an option to decide to bring in additive manufacturing to this problem space. So really a lot of what we're doing from the marketing perspective is education. Like, how can we teach people like what's possible, what you can do? How can we show you an example of another company that's done something really interesting with their printer? And then you can kind of look at that and say, hey, that's like me. I could do one of those the same way. So it's a really fun, from a marketing perspective, it's really fun because it really is about changing people's mindsets more so than it is like beating up, some other company for their market share. Like it's just, this industry is, it's so much opportunity here. We don't need to spend a lot of time doing that.
Yeah, I really love that from a mindset place where there's plenty of opportunity here. The real challenge is getting people outside of just the status quo that they have now. And I think it's a massive challenge, right? I think at every conference I've been to, people are like, oh, well, it's an education problem, right? Engineers don't know how to use it. They don't know where to use it, or they don't trust it. Um, how do you fix that? Is it you just pepper them with case studies, or what do you think is the most effective way? And then
Yeah.
I also have a theory about it, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
Yeah, this is a good one. So I think, well, let me maybe use a historical analogy and then kind of like layer our way into 3D printing. But so
Okay.
I think this size and scale of industry is so big, right? Manufacturing, it's like a third of the global economy. There's like so many millions of people involved in it. Changing that, changing the mindset of manufacturing is it's a big question. um, but it's happened before. And so like one of the most interesting parallels that I always point to is kind of the process whereby we electrified factories, right? So that transition from steam powered factory to electric powered factory. Um, in the popular retelling, like that change is what kind of created modern, the modern world, right? Like that's the industrial revolution, when all of a sudden you have assembly lines and electric powered factories. But it didn't happen overnight. In
Right.
reality, right, it's like there's like a 40-year gap from like the invention or whatever discovery of electricity in 1880 to maybe about 1919, 1920, when more than half of the factories in America were now powered by electricity. And so that
Yes.
tipping point is really important. And it's not the fact, I think from the beginning of the invention, people understand the potential, right? So we understand the potential of 3D printing. We understood the potential of electricity. It's just all of the other things that have to happen to allow
Mm-hmm.
you to actually commercialize it and put it into real use. And so for electrification of factories, you got to like reorganize the entire factory, right? It's like this whole thing has been optimized around these giant turbines.
Yeah.
It's a horrible place to work. Like no one wants to work there. Like that's how factories work. And so I think you got to get like the factory owner to think differently. You got to get the workers to think differently. And that takes a lot of time. I think some of the ways you can do that is by starkly illustrating the sort of the pitfalls of doing it the way you've been doing it for so long. And so this is where I bring in the pandemic. Sort of, the Industrial Revolution, we kind of mark the beginning point as like 1919, 1920. That's basically, 1 or 2 years after the global pandemic of 1918.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something going on there. It's not, the pandemic didn't cause this to happen. It maybe accelerated the pre-existing trends and also created that discontinuity, like the place where there's a breaking point. And I think we're seeing that in this pandemic too, right? So supply chain, all of a sudden, like it's not some dusty topic that you read about in a book somewhere. Like you're living supply chain disruption when you go to the grocery store and there's no toilet paper. Where'd the flour go? Like, why can't I get a car? Like, this is basically all examples of how we've organized our supply chains and what happens when some giant event washes over, and messes up all of our supply curves, all of our demand curves. Like, we did not build to sort of deal with a situation like this, but we could have. And maybe we should, because maybe these disruptions are going to happen more often. Maybe the world is globally and connected. Things that happen in one place affect places, other areas of the world. So I think when it comes to 3D printing, one of the things that I think is happening in this moment right now, and you mentioned, we've been having a big year here at Markforged. Part of it is I think we are kind of sitting at some kind of interesting inflection point. And I think we've seen the downfall of a lot of the ways that manufacturing and supply chains have been optimized. And so there's a strong reason to think differently. I think companies, manufacturers are beginning to see this. It's not, their supply chain is not a cost center. It's a competitive advantage. So if we invest in our ability to be more resilient and more agile in how we make things, we'll actually have a leg up against our competition. We can follow consumer demand more quickly. We could end up in a place where only we can solve the problem that the consumer has, and we can have a really great product. And I think, the pandemic's been doing that kind of across the board, right? Well, what restaurants, in your neighborhood are the ones that seem to be thriving right now? At least, for here, it's the ones that figure out how to pivot. Oh, like we'll set up a back patio. Like we'll change our menu. We'll embrace, online ordering. we'll figure out how to do delivery. Like those are the people who are thriving. The restaurants that were kind of we don't know how to do any of that. That's not what we do. We don't understand it. Like we're not doing that. They are no longer here. So like same idea for manufacturers. Like, are you a manufacturer who's figuring out how to embrace this idea of a very dynamic world? And if so, then this type of technology could be a great solution. So I guess to go all the way back to your question, how do you get people to kind of like, change their minds? Education is important. But I think having a stark illustration for why the change is important. Why is this something that's not just a utopian pipe dream of the future, but there's actually a real reason to do it and a real reason to do it now. That I think is going to change people's mindsets quite a bit.
Yeah, because if they start doing it now, in any small level, they're at least a front runner, right? In this new what is today a theoretical future, but I love the historical context you gave there. In today's world, thinking that a factory would be steam powered is just insanity. It's not even a slight thought to anyone's mind, because electricity is the way we all live in America today. So really, really interesting where we can kind of see the potential. I've seen it and I've like heard about it, talked about it, but really feeling the potential of cloud-based manufacturing to be as impactful as something like electricity is really kind of crazy to think about.
Yes, I think, I mean, I love as like a sort of storyteller or sort of student of history, I think it is so fun to look at other, take yourself out of the sort of exact scenario or environment you're in right now and kind of find those orthogonal parallels. And so I think, history is great. Other industries, there's so many, analogies to what's happening now, when we talk about distributed manufacturing to the computing industry from 20 years ago, right? So this idea, edge computing, you're moving away from giant supercomputers, pushing the data out to the network where you need it. Same idea for manufacturing, right? Like distributed manufacturing means placing your means of creating things all the way out in the edge where it's needed, not centralizing it in a giant supercomputer. And so I think there's like a lot of parallels, and then the same benefits, right? Cloud computing allows us to collaborate across large distances, allows us to communicate together. We've used that to create, social networks and like, Salesforce and all these kind of, sort of interconnected systems. We can do the same in the physical world as well. Like, why can't we apply that same power to the world of physical manufacturing?
Yeah, it's very cool to think about. And I guess I would add that I think those changes will happen more quickly than, say, the transition from steam to electric factories, right? Because information moves much more quickly than it used to. And I would just imagine that we would start to see that change. If it took 50 years last time, it's not going to take 50 years for this next change.
I mean, yes and no. I don't think it won't take 50 years from now. But for example, in the example I cited with electricity, it was 40 years from kind of invention to mainstream adoption. 3D printing is about 36 years old.
Yeah.
So maybe it will take about 40 years. Like that's what I mean. I think a lot of times it's the the change starts happening before you recognize it. 3D printing was invented well before the average person even understood what it was. There's been some ups and downs. I mean, I do think that we have that pattern of the hype cycle that certainly occurs too, right? So in the early 2000s, whatever, 2008, 2009, I think, there was a lot of outsized expectations for what 3D, we're all going to have a 3D printer in our basement. It's going to fix our car. It's going to make us chicken salad sandwiches. Like it's going to do everything, and going back to this idea of reliability, I don't think the technology actually did any of that. Probably a little overhyped. Also maybe the average consumer doesn't really know how to use a 3D printer because they don't know how to design things for it. But at the same time, it doesn't mean the industry just disappeared. Like a company like Markforged, I think actually was very busy coming out of the ashes of that with a different, okay, let's really focus on this industrial, where can we create, strong parts that have real use How do we build a system that does that reliably? That was what I think what a lot of the innovation is that's now powering the next cycle of this industry.
Yeah, I agree. I have nerded out many times looking at hype cycles of different products and kind of when they hit and why, and it's really interesting. But I think it kind of reinforces that idea of the industry is really, in a lot of ways, just getting started with the practical nature of it and what it will really be used for and the impact that we'll see from it.
Yep, I agree with that. I think it's very much it's still early. Like even our most advanced customers, they now they have maybe several printers in each of their local facilities. They got central part repository. They're printing, but it's still a tiny fraction of all of the operations that they're running. And I don't necessarily claim that like in the future 80% of all manufacturing will be additive. Like who knows, but we're still at the very early days. Like, it's still very much like, you look at like a Wohler's report or whatever, it's still, way less than 1% of all manufacturing is being done by additive. So there's just so much opportunity in front of us.
Definitely. It's an exciting time to be part of the industry. Kind of pivoting a little bit here, getting really specific, what does Markforged offer? I find it hard to believe that nobody who's listening to this podcast wouldn't be familiar with you, but if that is the possibility, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so Markforged, we're the creators and designers of the Digital Forge, which is an additive manufacturing platform that has very high quality and precise printers, specially tuned materials for a wide variety of applications, and software that glues it all together. And so the idea here is that you can print, we have a material called Onyx. It's kind of our base material. So you can print ABS plastic. You can print things that are reinforced with fiber made of plastic that are as strong as metal, or you can actually print metal all from that exact same platform. So what we love to say is that literally, it's as easy as just changing a drop-down box, and all of a sudden you can go from plastic to metal printing all from one platform. And ultimately, we're very focused on industrial use cases that require highly precise, very strong parts. And so that's, really, I think one, maybe, several unique things that our company has done. The first one, I think, is sort of from our very early days. Everyone always talks about metal as the holy grail of, okay, when you can print in metal, like, oh, it's 3D printing going to take over the world. Yes, metal is very important. It's certainly in the most demanding applications has very important properties. But the first thing that Markforged did in order to bring a future of metal printing was figure out a way to print stronger plastic. And so like using continuous fibers, whether it's, carbon fiber, Kevlar, fiberglass, but laying them down basically in continuous strands allows you to print something that really is as strong as aluminum. And so that's the first thing the company did was say, hey, here's a printer. It's easy to use, sits on your desktop, FDM, like it's very straightforward. And it can make something and replaces a lot of the metal problems that you have today. And so that's super cool. Then the company went on and said, okay, let's figure out how to print metal. And so now we have an FDM printer that does print metal, and it has, complexity that comes with it, right? There's a sintering of it and some other pieces, but basically you can now print, reinforced plastic and metal. And then I think the last sort of big unique aspect of Markforged is from the early days, the company was really founded by a software engineer and a hardware engineer working together. So it wasn't just this hardware lens, it wasn't just a software lens, it's really the fusion of those two things. And so the architecture of this entire system has always been architected to live natively in the cloud, knowing that the future is about distribution and knowing that the internet's going to be really important to that going forward. Knowing that security is super important. So it's like, in industrial use cases, like the data that's in here, the things that it's doing, very, very important, very secure to your operations. Instead of bolting that security on later, let's natively from the beginning think about how we're going to build a secure system that lives in the cloud and that can create distributed manufacturing. And so I think that's really given the company a lot of advantages. For example, like it's very easy to use. And so we kind of think, Markforged is sort of the Apple of 3D printing, right? It's a set of easy objects that all do what you think they're going to do, and you access them all, through a tab on your browser, like just like any other modern technology. I am always it's always a little funny to me when I walk into kind of an industrial setting. It feels like we've gone back to like Windows 98. It's
Yes.
like all the technology here feels kind of not of our current world. So I think what Markforged was able to do was see where we were headed, design for that world, and then now has this unified platform, which is a lot better than waking up in 2021 and saying, oops, we got to add the cloud to this thing.
Yeah. A couple, I think, highlights from your answer. I think that the combination of software and hardware developed cohesively is a huge indicator of the separation between hobby level printers and printers for actual businesses and companies, that they want that single system to be cohesive and to be easy to use all at the same time. So I think that's, I think, an important takeaway, and very cool that you guys have been doing that from the very beginning. And the second thing about thinking that you stepped into Windows 98 is so funny to me, because I used to walk around at manufacturing places like, but they're using paper charts and clipboards to track things, and like all of their equipment has like 30 knobs on it. Like there's not a touch screen in sight on a lot of the presses or CNCs that they're using, which is so different from how we live just like our day-to-day lives with phones and tablets and laptops, where it's so funny to me.
Yes, yeah, I think that's very true.
So I know we're getting close to the end of our time. It feels like it's flown by. So looking at some more high level 3D printing questions, what is one thing that you don't like about 3D printing? So this is sometimes a hard question for people to answer, so I'll ramble a little bit and give you a chance to think. But maybe you don't like that the most common color for 3D printing materials is black, or maybe you don't like that they're kind of slow compared to other technologies for manufacturing. Some people have said that they don't like the limitations on materials. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I would love to improve about 3D printing, and I think is a barrier today to what more widespread adoption of it, is there's still a decent amount of kind of what I call craft knowledge that's required to kind of get the best out of your printer. And so, this might be something like, okay, you've printed a lot with it, so okay, when I do this kind of feature, I got to design it this way. And I know that if the print bed, okay, I got to kind of print at this corner of the print bed because it kind of worked better there. And then I probably shouldn't leave it alone during this part of the print because sometimes it gets messed up. So I should be there to make sure it's okay. And like all those little things, I think to a hobbyist or a tinkerer could be fun. I mean, that's part of the like joy of one of these hobbies, right? It's like, why does someone still have a dark room and develop film? It's not efficient, but it's fun. So I think there's an element of that in the hobbyist landscape. But I think as we move into industrial use cases, and we move into production use cases where we're putting multiple printers in a parallel operation that are creating mission critical parts, that craft knowledge is going to hold us back. So if you need the printer expert, the person who like has been running this thing for 5 years in order to make anything off of it, it's still going to be slow. It's still going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of extra steps to jump through. So really at Markforged, one of the things we're trying to do is how can we start to take a lot of that knowledge that today, people have in their heads, the operators and the designers and the people that use them, and start putting those into the actual system. And so we use a lot of software technology, a lot of AI technology, and our ability to kind of use the data that is created from this platform. So every time a print happens, our printer is learning something. It's learning about what yields good outcomes, what types of features, what types of geometries, what type of settings, and it's beginning to offload those from the operator. So you'll notice, for example, if you use Eiger, which is our printing software and UI, It's actually pretty simple. The number of choices you have to make is pretty small. That's done on purpose because we're trying to put the intelligence, the slicer lives in the cloud. And so the slicer is very smart and is able to make a lot of decisions for you. You have some, elements you can change that are going to have some different kind of outcomes, but ultimately we think it's our job to make sure that something good comes off this printer, not you, that you have to sit there and fiddle with the knobs and turn everything and get it just right before you get a good part. And over time, we want that to become more and more automated. So on our industrial printer, we have a laser on the print head. That laser has the ability to do real-time part inspection. That data both lets you know that you got a good part, but also helps to make the system smarter. And so we're able to now start to see, the printer is becoming more aware. So it knows what it's making. Ultimately, we imagine a world, who knows when, where you basically describe to your manufacturing platform the kind of part it needs to have these characteristics, it needs to have this properties to solve this problem, but you, manufacturing platform, figure out what to make and go make it. I don't need to be the one doing all that. And so ultimately we want to take all of that sort of difficult craft type of work, see if we can get the platform and the printer to do it, and then let you, the human, basically be the source of creative imagination. You come with the coolest idea, you come with the coolest problem, we'll figure out how to print it. That's the world we'd love to live in. So I think your question, what do I wish was different about 3D printing? I wish that basically anyone could describe to a printer what they wanted and it would just magically come out. That's the world I want to create.
Yeah, that's a wonderful vision. But to your point, I agree. Today there is a ton of craft to a lot of the 3D printers that are in use today. Like some of the machines behind me, like I know them front to back, left, right, upside down. Like if there's a problem, I can quickly find it and fix it 99% of the time. But for someone who isn't used to running some of the machines that I run, that would be entirely different. So kind of on the flip side of that, if you look outside of your products and everything that you are trying to accomplish, what's one thing that you're really excited about in 3D printing? So I've gotten answers from there are lots of materials available to generative design to printed houses, so all across the board. But what's one thing you're excited about?
Yeah, a great question. I mean, I think it is sort of the diversity of different problem spaces that you can attack with something that's called a 3D printer, right? Everything from bioprinting to your point, like making a wood house, giant large format. So it's like, I think in some sense, it's that the narrow definition that a 3D printer looks like a box that sits next to your desk. I think that is not actually accurate. So I think that maybe the coolest thing about 3D printing is that there are so many different people and companies who are looking at different ways of solving useful problems using roughly speaking, an additive based approach versus a subtractive one. And so I think that is super cool. And again, are all of them commercially viable? No. Will all of them make sense? No. But I love the fact that people are pushing the boundaries in each of these different areas, because I think ultimately that is what allows this technology to be applicable. Why are we going to be able to use this technology? It's because people are trying really hard to find those killer application spaces that need this kind of technology to really work.
Yeah, that's not an answer I've gotten before, but it's one that I 100% agree with. One of the things that I love about 3D printing is how much it can impact so many different spaces. Really unlike any other technology that I've seen. I guess the computers, you could say, would be another valid answer as far as impacting a lot of different areas. Last question for you is where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about Markforged? And if there's any more specific actions you'd like the audience to take, now's your opportunity.
Yeah, You can find us at markforged.com. So please come over and check out our website to learn more about our company, the products that we create. Check us out on social media. So you'll find Markforged on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And I hope many of you will hopefully be going to the Formnext show if you're able to travel safely coming up in November in Germany. And so Markforged will be there. We're going to have a really big presence, a lot of fun stuff to look at. And I will tease one. We have announced a new printer that you'll get a chance to see for the very first time if you come by. So our new FX20, biggest, fastest, hottest printer we've ever made. It's a beast. You're going to really enjoy taking a look at it. And so we'd love to meet you. If you get a chance to come out to Formnext, please stop by the booth and say hi.
Awesome. So exciting. I love getting to see some of this equipment in person. So it's really cool that trade shows are back. Thank you so much again for taking the time to chat with me, and I'll look forward to connecting in the future. Best of luck to you and the rest of the team for the rest of the year.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my chat with Michael from Markforged. I think Markforged as a company has grown so much over the years, and I'm sure that will only continue since they've gone public. I think what they're working on is really impressive, and I'm very excited to kind of see how they grow and how really the future of cloud manufacturing progresses, not only with them, but with the rest of the industry. If you enjoyed this chat, maybe consider hitting the like button wherever you might be watching or listening. And as always, subscribe to 3D Print Authority so that you don't miss new episodes every time they come out. Power Belt is pretty busy for me right now as we're launching a brand new 3D printer. So episodes are going to be a little bit more sporadic, and I appreciate your understanding. I hope you have a great day and happy printing.